What's up, Wizards? It's Dev, Mtg. We like that magic stuff, and I got good news for you. This might be the last time that we have to do a spoiler video in this format. I apologize for yesterday's video and today's video being in this format, but I'm getting my air conditioning fixed tomorrow, which means I don't have to spend 3 hours editing spoiler videos in, a 92-degree office anymore. So that's very good news. But in other news, I actually woke up this morning with a loose tooth in my top row of teeth, in the front too, which is bad. I'm a content creator, although I don't think many of you watch me for my devilish good looks. But it's also terrible because it means I have to call a dentist, which is bad. There's not many things in this world I can say I legitimately hate, but dentists are one of them. I apologize to any dentists in the audience. I don't personally hate you. I just don't want you sticking drills in my mouth and stuff. It's bad. But anyway, I got to start talking about some cards because I know that I'm babbling already about stuff that 70% of you could care less about. You are here to see the spoilers, and I understand that. And yesterday's video was like an hour long, and I didn't expect that to happen. But Wizards keeps releasing 3,500 cards a day, and they did the same thing today. We are 3 days into spoiler season, and we have seen over 50% of the set already, which is kind of insane. But, they spoiled another billion cards today, so I got to go ahead and start talking about these so I can keep the video as succinct as possible. So let's go ahead and get into it with Tangled Fluorohedron and Tangled Veil. Now, this is one of those flip land things. It turns out there's a billion of these in this set. Veil is just a green source, enters the battlefield tapped, it's a land. Fluorohedron, on the other hand, is 1 and a green for a 1/1 elemental that taps for a green. So this is yet another 2-mana elemental that taps for a green alongside like Leafkin Druid, so this might be important in historic elementals, which will probably still see play in that format. So keep that in mind, but for standard, I actually really like the implications of this card. In terms of 2-mana mana dorks, it's actually not that great. It's just a 1/1 that taps for green, and there are better mana dorks. But I like the implications of what you can do with your openers if you have this in them. A couple of good examples are, let's say you draw Fluorohedron, 1 land, and another 2-mana dork. Well, on turn 1, you can just use Fluorohedron as Tangled Veil, make that your land drop for the turn. Turn 2, you drop your other land and play your 2-mana mana dork. So sometimes this will help you hit your land drops and still ramp and stuff. That's good. Because you'll be playing another mana dork with it. That's what I mean by you'll still ramp with it. But then other times, you'll have, 4 lands in your hand, and this is your only 2-drop mana dork in your opener, in which case that's perfectly acceptable too. There's just a bunch of different lines of play on this card, and although being versatile is true of every one of these tap lands, flip lands, I think that this is one that has the kind of versatility that you want in your ramp deck, to a degree that I think it's probably going to see some amount of standard play one way or the other. Also, the art is awesome. But anyway, let's move on to Ameria's Call, which is the much better of these flip lands, just right off the bat. There are some people that don't love this card, and I don't understand why. I think it's a really good lesson in opportunity cost, but Call is 7 mana, 4 and 3 white for a sorcery. Create 2 4/4 white angel warrior creature tokens with flying. Non-angel creatures you control gain indestructible until your next turn. And also, Myriad the Shattered Skyclave it's a land, all right? It's a land that taps for white, but it doesn't have to come into play tapped. You can pay 3 life and have it just enter the battlefield untapped, which is pretty freaking insane, right? A lot of times this is going to be better than basic planes in your deck. Now, you can't get it with Cultivate. You can't get it with Birth of Melodus. You can't get it with Fabled Passage. There's another card later on in this video that wants to go fetch up basic planes from your deck, and you obviously can't get this with those effects. So there's going to be times where obviously you still want to play basic planes. Basic planes is better. But I like this card from 2 different and sort of opposite angles. And again, this is why I think it's an opportunity, or a lesson in opportunity cost. Because the opportunity cost of including this card in your deck is almost 0. Very close to 0. You might as well play this card. In most cases, right? Ameria's Call is a 7-mana sorcery, and those can be bad because they rot in your hand. You don't want them in your opener. They're very bad to draw early, and especially bad to draw against aggro, where a 7-mana card like this might as well cost 70,000 mana rather than 7 mana, because you're just probably never going to get to that amount of mana against an aggro deck. So that's bad, and you wouldn't include that card in your deck. However, if you're never going to cast the card, you can just play it as a land drop. Again, you didn't really lose much. You can just play it as one of your land drops. So that's good. However, on the other hand, and again, I think opposing the first point, this also mitigates some of the downsides to being a land. You don't want to draw a land on turn 10 or 11. Sometimes it'll lose you the game if you draw a brick or a blank later on in the game. You really want to draw gas. You don't have other ways of drawing cards. You draw a land, you're screwed. Whereas this, if you draw it late in the game, it's actually a fantastic top deck, unlike turn 10. So not only does it mitigate the inherent downsides to being, a very expensive spell, but it also mitigates the inherent downsides to being a land. And that if you top deck it late, it's actually really good. Your creatures can just get in for alpha, or you can make, 8 power worth of flying creatures, which is good too. There's just a lot that I really, really like about this card. And again, this is true of all of the flip lands. Neither side is really playable on its own, but you slap them together, they're amazingly playable. And the fact that this can come into play untapped means that, again, a lot of the time it's going to be just as good or better to include this as basic planes, especially if you're already playing, 4, 5, 6 basic planes in your deck. Then you might as well play this card in place of one of them. So I don't understand people that hate this card. I think this card is destined to see play possibly in multiple formats because, again, the opportunity cost is just so unbelievably low of including the card in the deck in the first place. So I think this almost certainly sees play. It's a really good card. But moving on, we got our first one that we got to translate this guy a little bit. But I actually think this card is unbelievable. This, my friends, is Lulling Wizard's Dominance, and of course that's a translation, so it's subject to change, but this is 3 blue mana and X for a sorcery that costs 3 less if you target a creature whose controller has 8 or more cards in their yard. You gain control of target creature with converted mana cost X. That's so good. That is so good. That's so good, y'all. 3 blue mana means that it's probably priced out of being in most decks. I mean, what is it going to be in mono blue mill? Yes, it could absolutely be in mono blue mill, but I think this could also make it into blue black rogues, the deck that wants them to have 8 or more cards in their yard. Although I guess blue black mill in general, not even the rogues one, wants them to have 8 cards in their yard. For all kinds of reasons, drowning the lock and into the story if you're playing those cards. Vantress Gargoyle as well. So, there's a lot of reasons, even in mono blue mill or blue black mill, why you'd want to play this card. But it also, of course, goes into the blue black rogues deck. So this has multiple things that it goes into, and it actually establishes like a big threat to the board on your side, which can be really important. It's kind of a 2-for-1. All of these, Agent of Treachery, Control Magic, all of these effects are kind of a 2-for-1 because you're kind of removing your opponent's creature and giving yourself one as well. So steal effects are some of my favorite effects in Magic some of the time, but not always. But I think this one is probably in check, right? Like, I don't think that this card is too busted, but being able to steal, a 3-drop for 3 mana is going to be really good. By the way, even if your opponent somehow doesn't have 8 or more cards in the yard, this can be good. If your opponent has cast Euro out of their yard, they've escaped Euro out of their yard, and they no longer have 8 cards in their graveyard, but it's still the relative late game, you could probably still steal stuff with it. Hell, you can steal a Euro in the late game for 6 mana, which is worth it to steal a Euro. So I actually really like this. I don't know if it sees standard play, but I bet it does, just because, again, steal effects are almost always really good, and this will replace not only Agent of Treachery, which got banned forever ago, but it will replace, Mass Manipulation, which saw some sparing play. But I think this could see a fair amount of play, because even in like a deck that doesn't try to mill your opponent, it's probably going to, proc the cost 3 or less ability in the very late game. Again, so long as they're not escaping cards and stuff. So I do think that, maybe escape is a natural enemy to a card like this. But even in the very late game, it doesn't matter if your opponent has literally 0 cards in their yard. You're still going to steal something really good. For 7 mana, this steals like a questing beast, even if your opponent has 0 cards in their yard. And that's not the worst play. That's really not the worst play. Plus, it's not like an enchantment, right? It's not like a control magic where if they bust the enchantment, they get their creature back. No, you just get the creature forever. And that's kind of really good. It's kind of really good. I'm already a little bit in love with this card, but I can't keep talking about it because, again, we have to be as succinct as possible today. But if I could, I'd just do a whole video on this card. I love this card. It's crazy it's an uncommon. But let's go back to looking at more new stuff. But just so you know, this new bribery thing is amazing. But anyway, let's move on to Nissa Zindicon. This is 4 mana, 3 and a green for an aura that enchants a land. Enchanted land is a 4/4 elemental creature with reach and haste. It's still a land, and when it dies, you return the card to its hand. So, when the land dies, you return the land to its owner's hand. So it kind of mitigates a little bit of the usual problems with animating lands, but it does cost 4 mana. It costs 4 mana, but, I guess in limited, this is a decent common because turning one of your lands into a 4/4 reach for just 4, you'd pay 4 mana for a 4/4 reach haste. You'd pay that. So I guess that's not bad, although it mostly won't be truly good until you have 5 lands out, because you want to, you know, if you have 4 mana, you have to tap the land you put this on to cast the spell in the first place, and that's not great. But I don't absolutely love this, but I do think it's an interesting common for draft, if nothing else. Cleansing Wildfire is another card that, you know, interesting is probably the best word to describe this. Just 2 mana, 1 in a red for a sorcery, destroy target land. Its controller may search their library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield, tap, shuffle their library, and then you draw a card. So maybe this is sort of good against Tron, you know, it's a maybe, kind of. Or any deck that needs to assemble a bunch of different lands, or, you know, has an important land that it's relying on. You know, maybe in Commander you can use this against Gia's Cradle or something. I don't know. Like, it's 2 mana, draw a card at sorcery speed, and that's probably good. Plus, this will punish players who don't put enough or any basic lands in their deck, which could be a thing at some point in the near future, in Standard, but especially in older formats where you have access to all the best lands. Something like this could actually be a really big shot if your opponent's playing 0 to 3 basic lands in their deck. And they've already drawn all their lands or whatever. But just 2 mana, draw a card is kind of okay in and of itself. But if you happen to, you know, blow up a Castle Vantress or a Castle Ardenvale or a Castle Lochthwain or something like that with Wildfire, then it's pretty good. But this is almost never going to be worth main decking, despite the fact that it's 2 mana, draw a card. You know, I don't know how worth main decking this is going to really be. But, I mean, it's as close as it gets considering it draws a card. So cantripping really helps this card a lot. But moving on, we're looking at Mind Carver. I like this more than I should. This is just 1 black mana, and it's probably the art. The art is something I would have drawn as an edgy 14-year-old. But anyway, it's just a black mana for an equipment. And when it ETBs, you attach it to a creature you control. Equipped creature gets +1/+0. It gets +3/+1 instead, as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their yard. And you can equip it for 2 and a black. So the equip cost actually isn't like super steep on this. But, you know, just 1 black mana for +3/+1 in the Rogues deck is okay, but not good enough to play. I really don't think it's good enough to actually see play in the Rogues deck, but at the same time, in you know, limited, I could see this being okay if you're trying to get a number of equipments into your deck for whatever reason. You know, you have something that works with equipment. This is just a 1 mana investment that at least does something in the meantime. And once the game goes long enough, then your creatures get really big bonuses, you know, huge power bonuses too, so they can just like trade with anything in combat, and you don't care because you've still got Mind Carver to put on the next guy. So, you know, I could see this being okay in limited, but I really don't think it goes anywhere outside of that. Even for 1 mana, attach it to Thieves' Gold Enforcer or something, it's still probably not good enough in that deck. There's probably better ways to use those slots. But anyway, let's move on to what got spoiled today, because that was pretty much everything that got spoiled the rest of yesterday we didn't cover. Moving on to Cascade Seer. This is 4 mana, 3 and a blue for a 3/3 that when it enters the battlefield, by the way, it's a Merfolk Wizard. When it ETBs, scry X, where X is the number of creatures in your party. So this is always going to be a Hill Giant, 4 mana, 3/3 that scries 1. It's also a wizard, and it turns out there's a ton of reasons to play wizards in this limited environment, and it's common. So I think this is sort of a bread and buttery card, but I'm not sure how many copies you actually want to play in your limited deck. Hill Giant stats aren't really what they used to be. That's kind of a problem. But, you know, if this scry's 2, it's effectively, what, like an Octoprophet or whatever that card was called? And even that wasn't like the best card in the world. So I'm actually not sure how much I love this, but it does seem like it could have a chance. You know, fixing your next couple of draws this late in the game in limited, probably a good thing to be doing. So I'd look at playing this card, but it's probably more of a 23rd creature or a 23rd card in your deck than it is something you just, you know, slam. You definitely don't windmill pick this or windmill slam this pack 1 or anything. I don't think it's that important. But moving on, here's Seagate Colossus, 7 mana for a Golem Warrior. It's a 7/5 artifact creature that costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. So if you have 2 creatures in your party, it's 5 mana for your 7/5, and I think that's very likely what's going to happen most of the time. Even if you have a full party, this is still going to cost like 3 mana to cast, which is, I guess, really, really good, but I doubt you're going to have a full party often enough to make it really, really worth it. Although, you know, again, in Sealed, for instance, a relatively slow format, this is sometimes just going to be like a 6 mana 7/5, and that's okay. That's okay. But again, it has to really be worth the slot in your deck, and it's more of like the 23rd card you include when you're building your deck than it is, you know, something that you include early. But moving on to Sure-Footed Infiltrator, SFI is 4 mana, 3 and a blue for a 2/3 Merfolk Rogue. Tap another untapped rogue you control. Infiltrator can't be blocked this turn. Whenever Sure-Footed Infiltrator deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. So I like a lot about this. I don't really like having to tap another rogue I control, especially in limited where board presence is king, but Drawing a card is really, really good. Doing an extra 2 damage a turn is okay. And being able to get through, what is it, Zareth? I can't remember his name. The the new ninjutsu rogue. He's Demir. He's 5 mana, but he costs 4 mana to ninjutsu in. That guy. This dude in Limited can get that guy to ninjutsu in really, really easily. So this might be an uncommon that you really, really want. Especially if you have multiple rogues and an aura or equipment. You know, we just looked at that 1 mana equipment that gives it, you know, creature +3/+1 if the opponent has 8 cards in their yard. And so getting this through for like 5 damage a turn unblocked would be really, really nice. So I think this probably has a lot of interesting like wrinkles in Limited and a lot of things you can do with it. So I'm pretty interested in the card, but obviously it doesn't make it anywhere outside the Limited environment. But moving on, here's Gomafada Vanguard. GFV, and I actually like this card more than I should. In terms of like whether or not I think it could see constructed play, I think it actually might. First of all, her outfit kind of looks like the Shredder, which is dope. But anyway, this is 2 mana, 1 and a red for a 2/2 human warrior. And when it attacks, target creature an opponent controls with power less than or equal to the number of warriors you control can't block this turn. So this automatically stops just by itself without any other creatures in your party. This will stop like Fervent Champions from blocking most of the time, and other, you know, 1/1s, I guess, like Ginger Brute, Edgewall Innkeeper, which usually doesn't block anyway. It'll stop like 1/1 Death Touches from blocking, which is kind of important. Stops Serrated Scorpion from blocking. There's a ton of stuff you can think of off the top of your head. Selfless Savior, it stops from blocking. So there's just so much that just this card by itself can keep from blocking. That's nice. But if you get like a rogue turn 1, or a wizard on turn 1, maybe, I'm not sure. But if you go like turn 1 rogue, turn 2 Gomafada, then on turn 3, it's very likely that nothing your opponent's played in the game so far is going to be able to block when you attack with those cards. So I kind of think that's kind of nice, especially, you know, we're losing some good red 2 drops. We keep rogue, Robber of the Rich, but we lose like Runaway Steamkin. So we have to be on the lookout for good red 2 drops. And although this is nowhere close to Steamkin, it still might be close. It might be good enough for a mono red aggro deck to push some damage through, which I think is actually, I think it's a cool card, but I'm not sure it actually sees play, obviously. But moving on to Angel of Destiny, 5 mana, 3 and 2 white for a 2/6 Angel Cleric. This thing is Mythic, by the way. It is flying in double strike. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you and that player each gain that much life. At the beginning of your end step, if you have at least 15 more life than your starting life total, each player Angel of Destiny attack this turn loses the game. That's pretty good, everybody. I'm not sure how great it actually is, especially in a field full of aggro decks, which it looks like we will have. We'll have adventure decks, we'll have Ugin decks, but if Standard 2021 is anything to go by, we'll still have mono red, we'll still have the mono white life gain deck, yes, but we'll still have mono green Stompy as well. And so I just am not sure how much I really want to try to win off of this card, because once you have this card in your deck, you're basically trying to win off of it and nothing else, right? You know, it would feel weird too, by the way, to play, you know, Speaker of the Heavens on turn 1, turn 2 Daxos, turn 3 Linden, turn 4 Heliod, and just go off dealing damage. And then like on turn 5 you play Angel of Destiny and suddenly your game plan completely shifts to trying to win this way. And I just don't know how much I like it in the deck that it looks like it's most likely to go in, which is mono white. However, maybe the black-white Clerics deck gains enough life to want something like this. You know, I could possibly see that. There are a lot of cool things about it. It has a form of lifelink, but it usually only hits for 4. That said, if you throw an aura or an equipment or something on it, you know, if you throw an Embercleave on this, suddenly it hits for 6. And your opponent's gaining a bunch of life too, but hopefully this ends up killing them. Although, you know, they can, the turn that this ability is going to kill them, they can just, you know, get rid of Angel of Destiny with like a Heartless Act before you go to it into your attack steps. So there's a lot of reasons, ways it can be disrupted too. So I'm not sure how much I love putting this card in my deck to begin with. And even if you do put it in your deck and you start to, you know, think you're going to go off with it, there's a lot of ways to disrupt it for a relatively low cost. So I'm just not a huge fan of the card, but I do think it's cool, and that's what matters. But moving on here. This guy, this is a 2 mana 1/3. He's a Merfolk Cleric. I'm just letting you know. And I forgot what he did aside from that. So I actually am going to have to... I thought I was going to have to not look at it. Oh, that's right. This guy freezes creatures that he blocks. And that's it. But it's a blue Cleric, so you might need it for party decks. That's about it. This guy right here, Core Warrior. This guy, he's a 1/1 core warrior. Is he? Is he? Have I lied to you? He's a 1/2 core warrior. And you can pay 4 and a white to have creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Again, it's a 1-drop warrior, and you are going to need that for the party mechanic in limited. But I don't think it's too great outside of that format. I'm pretty sure. And this thing right here, this is an elf wizard. It costs 4 mana for a 3/2, and it draws a card when it enters the battlefield, which is actually a really good common. That is a really good common in limited, y'all, just so you know. 3/2 isn't the best stat line, but it'll often trade with stuff, which is important, and it replaced itself when it came into play. This is a good card. For limited, that's it. But moving on, the Phantom Thief, Zagaris Thief of Heartbeats. Make your Persona 5 jokes now. This is 6 mana, 4, a red, and a black for a 4/4 legendary vampire rogue that costs 1 less to cast for each creature in your party. It has flying, death touch, and haste, and other creatures you control have death touch. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player or a planeswalker, destroy that planeswalker. So this is very, very neat. Is it good, though? I think so. Rogues doesn't look like a black-red deck, and it certainly doesn't look like a Grixis deck. I guess you could make Grixis Rogue in Historic, where we have both Shocklands and the untapped, flip duels. The mana is probably a lot better in that format. But in Standard, I don't see us going Grixis for an aggro deck. But if we do go black-red, it's possible that, this isn't really a rogue deck, it's a party deck, but, you have to go like warrior on 1 or something, cleric on 2, and then really what you really want to do with this card, I think, is go, 1-drop creature in a party. And then on turn 2, 2 more 1-drops of other creature types. That way you can technically play this on turn 3, if you can pull that off. 1-drop rogue, turn 2, a 1-drop wizard, and a 1-drop cleric. Or something, and then on turn 3 you play Zagaris. But again, that's really easily disruptible. But if you get this for 4 mana, I still think it's fine. A 4 mana flying death touch haste, that's a 4/4, seems like a really outrageous deal. So I like this card, and I want it to be good. I think that it's one of the better payoffs for having a party deck. And if you are going to build black-red, you could probably build a fairly aggressive, fast deck that gets this down by like turn 4 most games. And then it replaces like Spawn of Mayhem in the meta. It actually is really good. It kind of feels like a flying questing beast when you play it for 4 mana, right? But and that's very high praise. In some way this beats Rankle, but you still might want to consider playing Rankle instead of this card. That's an interesting decision right there. But we're in a format with like Elder Gargaroth, and even though this does have death touch, it's still not great against Elder Gargaroth. So there's a lot of considerations to make when looking at whether or not this card is good, but I think if you can get it on turn 4, it's probably going to be good in your, Rakdos party deck. So I like it. I like the card a lot, but I kind of have to withhold judgment on it because I'm not sure if it's going to be great. That said, if you can get it for 4 mana and it's a flying questing beast or something that also gives all your other creatures death touch, like that's a lot. That seems really good to me. But moving on, let's look at one of the best cards of the day, like easily, Inscription of Abundance, and let's really hope this is a cycle, and I think it probably will be. Inscription is 1 and a green for an instant with kicker 2 and a green. You choose 1, but if you kicked the spell, you choose any number of these abilities instead. You can put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature, or target player gains X life, where X is the greatest power among creatures that player controls, or target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. So a 2 mana fight effect at instant speed is kind of the floor on this in a lot of ways. If your opponent doesn't have creatures to use the fight effect, then you can just put counters on one of your creatures. That seems good. The only problem I have with this is that all the modes require you to have a decent creature out, which is not great. But at the same time, even if you don't kick this, for 2 mana, it's a steal. Charms like this are always great. And honestly, Zendikar Rising is shaping up to look like the versatility set. Just all the cards do like 8 things. that's going to be really, really cool. Cards like with this level of versatility are almost always playable, and I see this as being 100% playable. It just has to find the correct deck. Is Primal Might a better card than this? Is Ram Through a better card than this for the Stompy decks? I'm not absolutely sure. Having the first and third mode seems really, really good. And honestly, even having the second mode against like Mono Red seems great if you have a Questing Beast out or something. You just gain 4. awesome. But, you know, 5 mana is not really that much to kick it, especially at instant speed. So getting all of these things at instant speed for 5 mana is actually really sweet too. So I really like this card, like a lot, if you can't tell. I think it's one of the best cards of the day. And I really, really hope this is a cycle, and it sure looks like it's going to be. Matter of fact, if it is a cycle, I think that it has the potential to, you know, have an entry in the cycle that's so busted that it changes standard, you know, fundamentally. But, you know, just I love the way this card looks, and if it's not a cycle, I'm going to be very upset. But one way or the other, I like Inscription a lot. But we'll move on to Highborn Vampire. Just 4 mana, 3 and a black for a 4/3 Vampire Warrior. That's what the card does. Moving on, let's look at Angel Heart Protector. 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 3/2 Human Cleric. When an ETBs, target creature you control gains indestructible till end of turn. I guess that's fine. Again, you know, it's a limited common. It's kind of okay. If you're building the party deck, it might be all right. You know, lets you keep your dudes around for party and still swing with them on the same turn, right? You know, like you can be a little less sheepish about swinging in with your full party because you'll be able to give at least the most vulnerable one of them indestructible. So yeah, maybe it's all right. I think the card should have flash. Let me put it that way. But moving on, here's Fissure Wizard. This is 1 and a red for a 2/1 Goblin Wizard. And when it ETBs, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. So I, for some reason, can't remember the name of it, and it's going to kill me because I played this card a lot. Like, I played this card in a whole bunch of decks. But the Rakdos thing that's you know, rotating out of the format that costs 2 mana for a 2/2. When it ETBs, discard a card, draw a card. Or you can Spectacle it and just discard your hand, draw 3 or something like that. This card is the replacement for that card. Only it has 2 really good creature types, both Goblin and Wizard. There is a Goblin deck in this format. We have Conspicuous Snoop and stuff. So there is a Goblins deck. But, you know, I've always liked this kind of ability on a cheaply costed creature. I think it could be really neat. But time will tell if it sees play, because the Rakdos 2-drop I'm talking about didn't really see that much play, but it did see play here and there. You know, as a role player. So this might do the exact same thing. But Relic Robber is a card a lot of people are talking about today. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 2/2 Goblin Rogue with haste. And when it deals combat damage to a player, that player creates a 0/1 colorless Goblin Construct artifact creature token with, this creature can't block. And at the beginning of your upkeep, this creature deals 1 damage to you. I don't like this card. Like, it looks really bad to me. Just, like, I don't know why you'd play it. I don't get it. Especially, like, if you're playing against a deck that has a sacrifice outlet of some kind, you know, a deck that's playing with, like, Village Rites. This card is actively terrible, but in most cases, it's a 3 mana 2/2 haste that will occasionally leave behind a token or 2 that will end up, you know, being like a Chandra emblem, you know. But again, if they have any way of sacrificing stuff, then it's fairly bad. I think there's way better 3-drops that you could play. You know, like, is this 3-drop haste 2/2 like sort of the replacement for Legion Warboss? Because that's bad. I just want to like this card, and it is really cool. The design on it is dope, and I love cards that are designed in a cool way, but I just don't see it being amazing. But I'm willing to eat those words, right? I'm willing to. I hope that this is an amazing card in, like, the Rogue deck or the Goblins deck. You know, it just pushes the Goblins deck into tier 1, but I don't see it happening at all. Especially like a 3-drop that dies to shock. Probably not going to see much standard play. But anyway, I mean, Midnight Reaper saw standard play, so what am I talking about? But anyway, Feed the Swarm is up next. This is the card everyone's talking about today. And I have opinions. This is 1 and a black for a sorcery. Destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to that permanent's converted mana cost. So black can just kill enchantments now. And we already had Farika's Libation, which causes someone to sacrifice an enchantment for 3 mana. And it is modal, so it's not just that. But this, the conversation I keep seeing today is somebody will say this is a color pie break. And then somebody else will come in and say, no, they're changing the color pie to accommodate black blowing up enchantments. And it's like, yeah, that's called a color pie break. Right? Like, they can change the color pie to accommodate black blowing up enchantments, and I actually am kind of excited about that decision. Ultimately, I want to be very clear on this, because apparently I haven't been clear enough this spoiler season. I get people in the comments section that are like, why don't you like this card? And it's a card that I loved. Like, I ranted and raved about it. I had a guy yesterday in the comments section say, like, I don't know why you don't like these flip lands. And it's like, I've made it very clear that I love the flip lands. I don't know how you got the impression that I don't. But anyway, so I want to be very clear here. I am excited that black can now has the ability to blow up enchantments. I think ultimately it's probably a good thing. But you can't say it's not a color pie break. You can't say it's not a color pie break. They're changing the color pie. Changing the color pie is effectively the same thing as breaking the color pie. The only difference is you could actually say that it's worse because changing the color pie is breaking the color pie from its current iteration forever, whereas one color pie break would break the color pie for 2 years while the set's in standard. Whereas if they've just changed the color pie to let black break enchantments now, then it's just forever black's going to be able to break enchantments. And I think that that's problematic in some ways, but again, ultimately I think it's a good thing. And this is main deckable because it's not the worst creature removal spell in the world, I think that some decks, like aggro decks, for instance, that want to play some removal spells, sometimes they'll play like 2 or 3 eliminate, 2 or 3 heartless act. They will almost certainly opt to play this card instead, because now they'll, just a mono black deck or a Rakdos deck can blow up, banishing light and any of those, enchantments that exile your creatures until the enchantment leaves play. That's going to be somewhat important. But, in an aggro deck, you really don't care that you're going to lose the life at all. So this is just much better in most cases in an aggro deck than, say, Heartless Act would be. Or especially Eliminate, because this is 100% unconditional. It's going to kill Stonecoil Serpent, where Heartless Act won't. It's going to kill Questing Beast, which is very important for aggro decks, where, Eliminate won't. So I'm fairly certain this is going to see a ton of play, one way or the other. But that's just because it's a solid spell, even outside of the, oh my god, black can kill enchantments thing. And it's a common, by the way. So it fits into Pauper, and that's probably important. But, not only can it break enchantments, and that's a huge deal, but the spell itself is dope. 2 mana, it's sorcery speed, that's kind of lame, but 2 mana for this effect is actually unbelievable. Life is a resource, remember that, kids. But let's move on to Song Mad Ruins and Song Mad Treachery. I actually kind of like this card a lot. Because again, I like these flip lands. Song Mad Ruins is just tap to add a red and an ETB's tap. And then Song Mad Treachery. And for a while I thought this was Sorin on the art, but I don't think this is Sorin. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 red for a sorcery. It's basically a threaten effect. Gain control of target creature until end of turn. Untapped creature gains haste until end of turn. So you have to pay 5 mana for your threaten effect. But it comes with a land staple to it, and I actually think this is super playable. A lot of sealed decks will love these threaten effects in the sideboard. But you don't have to play them in the sideboard anymore. Even some... Whoops. Why did that happen? But anyway, I did that in yesterday's video too. But even, some decks will play like main deck act of treason. Like the red-black sacrifice deck. This season occasionally played, main deck 2 of Act of Treason. And this could go in. This could go in because it's a land drop. There's almost no opportunity cost. If you want an effect like this in your deck in the first place, that means there's almost no opportunity cost to playing this card. Except for the fact that it costs a little bit more mana. But I actually kind of like this on turn 5. Gives the board a chance to develop. You can not only steal a creature, but you can also put yourself in a better position by the time you have 5 mana to actually make the card good some of the time. Although, turn 3 Active Treason is amazing sometimes, don't get me wrong, but I actually kind of don't mind the 5 mana Active Treason effect, and especially considering it's stapled to a land. I just think that it's infinitely more main deckable than like any Active Treason effect we've ever seen, so you have to pay attention to this card. But moving on, let's look at Crawling Barrens. This card is crazy. This is just a land that taps for a colorless, or you can pay 4 and put 2/1/1 counters on Barrens, and then you may have it become a 0/0 elemental creature until end of turn. It's still a land. So a lot of cool stuff about this. First of all, it can tap to pay its own ability. You can tap it to pay its own 4 mana ability. And sometimes you'll do that, because note the may on this, you may have it become a 0/0 elemental. That's actually really important, because there are going to be turns where you just want to dump counters onto it. You don't want to make it a creature and turn on your opponent's removal. You don't want to turn on your opponent's eliminate or something. So there are going to be turns where, you bide your time, you don't have any other way to spend your mana, your draw go, you didn't counter a spell that turn or something. And you just have extra mana to spend. Well, you just dump it all in the Crawling Barrens, put counters on it. And eventually you just swing in with an 8/8. Right? And that seems really, really, really good to me. So I like this card, and I think that it might actually be like a draw go kind of finish. You know, we've seen draw go decks back, even way back to like 1998, use these creature lands as their finishes, and it's entirely possible that happens. But it's also just going to be a massively playable card in multiple decks, especially, you know, monocolored decks or monocolored aggro decks even that want some kind of late game strategy and don't have too many different, you know, colored mana symbol requirements in their deck. You know, like mono white will play Linden most of the time. You probably won't play Crawling Barrens. Mono red will play Torbrand, so you probably won't play Crawling Barrens. But there are going to be some decks with creatures that can really take advantage of a mana sink like this, and that's going to be important. I like Crawling Barrens a lot. I think it's destined to see a ton of play, just so you know. But moving on, here's Archon of Ameria. This is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 2/3 Archon with flying, and each player can't cast more than one spell each turn. Non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. This looks like the community is fairly split on whether or not this card is good, and I'm on the fence about it too. I'm a little ambivalent about this one because, you know, Kinjali's Sunwing didn't see a ton of play. This is not Kinjali's Sunwing, but it is a 3 mana, you know, 2-power flyer that taxes your opponent in some way. Vryn Ringmare is another good example. Vryn Wingmare is a 3 mana, 2-power flyer that taxes your opponent's spells, and that saw no play. It just got reprinted, still sees no play. And this is yet another 3 mana, 2-power flyer that taxes stuff your opponent does, and you as well, in terms of the rule of law effect, the first effect on the card. So I just don't want to be fooled by one of these cards again. I really don't. Although I will say, you know, this does, my knee-jerk reaction to this is that it's very good. My unobjective reaction to this is that I really want to like this card a lot. You know, it can't be like Scorching Dragon Fired, but it can't be Shocked, which is probably the red card people are mostly going to be playing with. But then again, against red, I guess you don't want them to double spell. But even red right now is a deck that plays, you know, turn 3 NX, turn 4 Embercleave, and those are the only spells they play. Like turn 3 NX, turn 4 Torbrand, and they don't double spell some turns. But anyway, went on a bit of a tangent there. But, you know, not every deck double spells. Rule of Law has been in the format for a while now, and it does nothing, and this is easier to kill than a Rule of Law. The non-basic land your opponent control enter tapped is pretty good. I mean, that's one of the better parts of the card, but I still don't know exactly how to evaluate this. There are people out there saying it sees modern play. There are people out there saying that it sees historic play because historic death and taxes could actually be a thing. And I would love it if this made it into some sort of standard historic death and taxes deck, but I'm going to hold my breath for now because I'm not 100% sure, and I don't want to be burned by a card like this again, but I'm a little on the fence. I'll probably say that this card is more good than bad. This card is more good than bad all day, but how good, I'm not actually sure I want to say yet. But we'll move on to Exploration de Valakut. This is a Valakut exploration right here. Another one people are talking about. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for an enchantment. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card as long as it remains exiled. At the beginning of your end step, if there's cards exiled with Valakut Exploration, put them in their owner's graveyards. Then Valakut Exploration deals that much damage to each opponent. So if you Fabled Passage, that means this will proc twice in the same turn, and you can, you know, ping for 2 at the end of your turn. Or you'll have 2 cards to cast. That makes Fabled Passage a lot better. Same thing with things like Cultivate or Euro, obviously, this seems pretty decent with, because anytime you can get multiple cards to turn off of it, it's going to be good. And even if you can't cast those cards, then suddenly, you know, you get a ping for each one that you're able to do. And on most turns, you know, you're going to get one. This makes drawing a land a lot better because you're going to draw more cards. If you have stuff like Azusa or, say, Dryad of Elysian Grove out, then if you play a land and get a land off of this, you can play that land, right? So that's really neat, and then you get another trigger off of it. So there are cool things about this, but it's still, you know, at the end of the day, it's a 3 mana do nothing enchantment. It doesn't do anything the turn it comes into play. It probably doesn't generate all too much value over the course of the game. There are going to be turns where you don't draw a land on turn 8, and this does literally nothing. It just sits on the board. So there's a lot of fail cases with this card that I'm not necessarily happy about. But it does look like a really cool card if you're playing, like, while you're playing lands. So I kind of like it, but I'm apprehensive to say this card is good. I really am. I think, again, there's just a whole lot of fail cases. But on to a couple of cards that I really, really like. First of all, Seagate Stormcaller. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 human wizard with kicker 4 and a blue. When it ETBs, copy the next instant or sorcery spell you cast with converted mana cost 2 or less. If Seagate Stormcaller was kicked, copy that spell twice instead. You may choose new targets for the copies. Now, I more or less ignore the kicker on this. 7 mana plus, 2 mana for a spell is a lot. That's a lot of mana. And unless you have all the mana in the world, it's probably not going to happen. Now, there might be some kind of weird interaction with this in a ramp deck that lets you cast effectively the same spell over and over. And this might be really good with, say, Thassa, because, you can blink it every turn and cast the same spell over and over. I mean, all of this seems kind of interesting. But I really don't care about the kicker. I just look at this as a 2 mana, 2/1, copy the next, shock or opt or see the truth or cathartic reunion that you play this turn. Copy the next Scorching Dragonfire that you play this turn for 2 mana. So you can do that on turn 4. That seems good. On turn 3, you can go this into Shock or Opt, and again, that seems really good. You can also go on 4, you can go this into Double Bone Crusher or Brazen Borrower, which also seems very good. So, in the opening turns of the game, turn 2, 3, 3, 4, this seems really good. And probably likable effect standard, too. I've seen some people saying, why would you compare this to Snapcaster? Obviously, you compare it to Snapcaster because it's a 2 mana, 2/1 in blue that allows you to get extra mileage out of the same spell. Obviously, it's not Snapcaster. It doesn't have flash. You can't play an opt on turn 1 or a bolt on turn 1 and then recast it on turn 9. It's not really how this works. You have to have the spell in hand. So let's say you top deck this late in the game and you don't have any other cards in your hand. It's very bad in those situations, but I could see this being just good enough on the turns where it's supposed to be good that it creates a ton of value for you. Even on turn 3, like this into Double Shock seems fantastic. So I like this card a lot, and I think it probably will see some amount of play. And there's very likely something quite broken you can do with it. Just casting, let's say you get a See the Truth that actually draws the 3 cards for you. Yeah, double casting See the Truth seems amazing. So yeah, but let's move on to one of my favorite cards of the entire day. And one that I don't think people are, by and large, taking seriously enough. But this is Yasharn, Relentless land. 4 mana, and it's not a land. 4 mana, 2, a green and a white for a 4/4 legendary elemental boar. When it ETBs, search your library for a basic forest and a basic plains and put them into your hand. Players cannot pay life or sacrifice non-land permanents to cast cards or use activated abilities. So that hoses a fair amount of stuff, just so you know. It would have hosed the cat if they hadn't have banned the cat, so that's interesting. It also does hose fetch lands. I know it looks like it doesn't because it says non-land permanents, but it also says players cannot pay life. So fetch lands that require you to pay a life, can't use them. That's interesting. Really interesting. It also hoses, Village Rites and a ton of other things, Witch's Oven, weaponize the monsters. There's a whole lot that I'm missing here, but this definitely does a whole lot of things. Also, players cannot pay life to use activated abilities or cast cards is a big one. There's just so many little things this hoses, but it's still worth main decking because even if it didn't have that last line of text on it that makes it, kind of a sideboard piece, I actually think it's main deckable. 4 mana, 4/4, not amazing stats, but still decent stats, and drawing 2 cards when it ETBs is really good. I know it doesn't ramp and it only draws lands, but getting your 5 and 6 drop lands that's really important. Even if your opponent kills this, you're still going to get your 5th and 6th land drops, and that is unbelievably important. And I think way more important than a lot of people are evaluating this card right now. Again, just drawing those 2 lands is huge. That is huge, and you get a threat too. I think the card is unbelievable, and actually this is like the 2nd or 3rd card I've seen in this set that makes me think Selesnya or maybe even Abzan, but just the Selesnya color combination is getting a little bit of juice from Wizards, because I know it's not super good. But, a 4 mana 4/4 that's at least on rate, that draws you 2 cards is good. That's a good card. Just think of how Birth of Melodus gets you that 3rd land drop, and 3rd land drop is more important than your 4th or your 5th or 6th land drop. But depending on how you've curved your deck out, what you want to cast in that game, getting your 5th and 6th land drops can be unbelievably important. Like getting the 5th land drop to play from this into, say, Elspeth Conquers Death seems like a pretty important line to me. So I like this card. I like this card an awful lot. But moving on, here's Skyclave GOP. The art is the coolest part of this card. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for an insect. It's a 3/1 with trample. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, GOP gets +2/+2 till end of turn. So if you drop 1 land, you have a 5/1 trample. which feels almost like a ball of lightning, right? But if you drop multiple lands, it's suddenly huge. But I still don't think it actually sees standard play. I think this is very likely more of a limited piece. That's going to be really important for shoring up the aggro landfall deck in red and green. But I really don't think that for 3 mana this is going to see much play outside of that environment. But moving on to Vastwood Surge. This is 4 mana, 3 and a green for a sorcery with kicker 4. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Put them onto the battlefield tapped, shuffle your library. If the spell was kicked, put 2+1/+1 counters on each creature you control. So I think that Migration Path is probably still the better card if you're going to play, an explosive vegetation type card. 4 mana, go get 2 lands, put them into play tapped. I think Migration Path is still better because it cycles. But by the same token, if you're playing more creatures in your deck, then Vastwood Surge might be the better card. It's not a bad card at all. It's not a bad card at all, but I think it's probably just going to be outclassed by a slightly better card while it's in standard. But again, in limited, this is 2 landfall triggers. Just like the next card, Roiling Regrowth. This is 3 mana, 2 and a green for an instant. Sacrifice a land, search your library for up to 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield tapped, shuffle your library. So for 3 mana, you get the 2 lands tapped. Instead of a Cultivate that puts 1 into your hand, you get both of them on the field, but you got to sack a land. Now, there are multiple reasons why you might want to sack a land, put a land in your yard for escaping or whatever. In Historic, you've got like Elvish Reclaimer that wants lands in the yard, so there are reasons to sack a land, first and foremost. This also can help you fix your mana. In a 3-color deck, you've got 2 blue sources and a red source, 2 green sources and a red source, but no blue sources. Let's put it that way. Well, you can sacrifice one of your, green sources, and now you have perfect teamer mana. So that's important, but most likely this is there because it triggers landfall twice, just like the last card. It makes cards like Skyclave Geopede really good, right? You play your land for the turn, then you Roiling Regrowth, and suddenly Geopede got +6/+6 that turn, and it can attack for 1,000,000. So again, I think in limited these cards are very good, but I'm not sure how good this is going to be in standard, where we do have Cultivate as an option, and it's very likely better unless you're specifically playing the landfall deck. But moving on, let's look at Blood Beckoning, just 1 black mana for a sorcery with kicker 3. It is Raise Dead, just return target creature from your graveyard to your hand, but if you kick the spell, instead return 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand, yet another strictly better Raise Dead. In limited, I love this card. I really do. I don't love Raise Dead in limited, but I do love getting, occasionally a Raise Dead and occasional actual card advantage out of a card like this. I think this is actually really sweet, but it's only for limited and limited only. But next, let's look at Vine Gecko, ladies and gentlemen. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 Lizard Elemental. The first kick spell you cast each turn costs 1 less. Whenever you cast a kick spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Gecko. So this, if you can actually kick something on turn 3, looks pretty decent, but I don't think it's good enough for standard. I really don't. It's just a bear the first turn you play at a 2 mana 2/2. It can be shocked. It can be taken out in a million different ways. You don't want to block with it, so it's not as good against aggro as you might think. But you're not going to block with this a lot of the time because you want to get it bigger. You want to continue to use its cost reduction effect. So, you want to keep it on the battlefield. It can get Heartless acted if it doesn't have counters on it yet. It can get eliminated all game. So there's a lot of issues with it. Creatures like this that can get you a lot of value over the course of the game, I think are awesome. I've always loved creatures like this, setup pieces that snowball into synergy, but I don't know how safe those are to play in the current format or in the next format. But we'd have to see some really sweet stuff with kicker, and we'd actually have to see, I think, at least 2 playable cards that we can kick on turn 3 after this in order for it to actually see standard play. But in terms of, if you just want to build a kicker deck on a casual level, this is probably, obviously a 4 of inclusion, just right off the rip. But anyway, let's move on here to what's next, everybody. Paired Tactician, 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 3/2 human warrior, and whenever it and at least one other warriors attack, you put a +1/+1 counter on Tactician. I don't love it. I really don't. Rockslide Sorcerer is 4 mana, 3 and a red for a 3/3 human wizard. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery or wizard spell, Sorcerer deals 1 damage to any target. That's really sweet. That's so sweet. That's so sweet, right? Not standard playable at 4 mana. 4 mana is an awfully steep amount for this ability, but I do love doing pings. Pings are one of my favorite things, and the fact that it's any target is really sweet too, especially on turns where, like, you play this and then the next turn you go like shock a thing, deal an extra damage to it. Dragon Fire that thing, deal an extra damage to it. But you can just go like shock into another wizard, and suddenly, you've dealt 4 damage to a thing, or you've taken out 2 small permanents. And that seems really good. I think this is going to be one of the most important uncommons in all of the limited environment in this set, but I don't think it goes any farther than that. But that's a pretty good distinction, honestly. Let's look at Nimana Skitter Sneak, and more art that disturbs me, but also kind of makes me laugh. This is 4 mana, 3 and a black for a 3/4 human rogue. And as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, Skitter Sneak gets +1/+0 and has menace. So not really much to write home about, honestly. It's not going to see play in the rogues deck, but pretty much my entire thoughts on the card. The art's funny. That's it. Malakir Blood Priest is next. This is 2 mana, 1 and a black for a 2/1 vampire cleric. And when it ETBs, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures in your party. So it's always going to drain for at least 1 when it ETBs. Not bad. But I don't think the card is that good, all things considered. Although it is a drain effect that affects the battlefield, which you don't see every day. So I kind of like that, in draft, especially if this is your 2-drop cleric, then you could be doing a lot worse than this. So I kind of like it. And of course, the party deck might want 4 copies of this, because if you get it in the relative early game, sometimes it deals 2 damage to your opponent, or they lose 2. You get it in the relative late game, it'll do, all 4 to your opponent, you'll gain 4. So this might actually be a really good card to help you stay in the game and stabilize, but also deal incidental damage to your opponent. And I could see this being okay, but I want to try it, and I don't see it being amazing, but I do want to try it. Moving on, let's look at Broken Wings. This is 3 mana, 2 and a green for an instant. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature with flying. So I think this is an upgrade to Crushing Canopy, which is already a played sideboard card. So this will almost certainly see sideboard play. It's just amazing. Cards like this are great. They just are great. And they're actually main deckable sometimes in limited environments. So yeah, good card. But moving on, let's look at Bubble Snare over here to the left first, because I don't have to translate it. And honestly, I don't have to translate Estampida de Mankini, McKindy, excuse me, because that card is easy enough to translate on its own. But Bubble Snare is just 1 blue mana for an aura. It's got kicker, 2 and a blue, and it enchants a creature. When it ETBs, if it was kicked, you tap the creature. But it freezes the creature down while it's on the creature. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. So for just 1 blue mana, if you put it on an attacker, right, then on your next turn you put it on something that attacked you. That's actually not the worst steal in the world, and kind of feels like blue removal, but I don't think that it actually does anything. Right? A lot of times you're going to have to kick this to actually get it to work, especially if you want to use it against whatever they've most recently played. You're probably going to have to kick this. And whatever they've most recently played is likely their best creature in the first few turns of the game. So I don't love it, but it is blue removal, and you'll play at least a couple of copies of it if you get it in limited and you don't have better options. But Estampida de Makindi, I shouldn't try to do the voice. Estampida de Makindi is a sorcery, and creatures you control gain +2/+2 till end of turn. That's what that does. But it also is a flip land. You can tap it for white, but it enters tapped, and that's the whole card. And I don't love it. But this is really playable too in limited, where sometimes you want this kind of overrun effect that this really reminds me of the Lion King, but I'm kind of surprised that it wasn't in green, right? But sometimes you really kind of want this kind of overrun effect in limited, but it can feel bad too. There's going to be times where you draw it and you don't have a whole bunch of creatures out. It's not very good. You draw it early sometimes and it's not good enough. You draw it after a wrath and it's not very good. Well, again, this kind of design mitigates all of the problems inherent in a 5-mana overrun effect, because it's also a land drop. So I really like this. Again, opportunity cost and limited to play this card is extremely low, and you will play it in your limited decks, but I don't think it just slots into your standard white weenie decks. I don't think it does that. Those decks neither want tap lands nor 5-mana spells like this. So I don't think this touches standard, but in limited, this is actually a really, really sweet card. But I'm going to reload Mythic Spoiler, even though I feel like I sort of just did that because I came back from a card I had to translate. But you never know. There might be new cards. I don't want to miss anything. Let's roll the dice. Nothing. That is it. And we have to get rid of this gap ad. You guys told me to get an ad blocker the other day. I don't like ad blockers, and I know that sounds really, really weird in 2020, but ad blockers also block all the ads that you would see on YouTube, and I like to watch the ads on YouTube. I skip the ads, but I like for there to be ads on videos on YouTube, because that is the way your favorite creators make money. So if you have your ad blocker on, me and all your other favorite creators are not making AdSense money. And I'm a YouTube creator, so I know what it's like to not make AdSense money, so I don't employ an ad blocker because I don't mind skipping ads and making sure my favorite YouTubers get paid. But anyway, that's a small tangent right there. That's all the cards for today so far. Like I said, AC will be fixed tomorrow. I'm not sure what time tomorrow it'll be fixed, but hopefully this is the last time we have to do the spoiler video in this particular format. But I hope y'all are enjoying it. It does, I do get to go over everything quick and easy, and that's kind of nice. But I'm sure this video was an hour long again today. I apologize for that, but if Wizards didn't put out 80 cards a day, I wouldn't have to put out hour-long videos. But I hope y'all are enjoying them. Just let me know where I screwed up today, because I think I screwed up yesterday. I forget where I did. I forget my flub yesterday. Was it Containment Priest? Was it the Containment Priest thing? I think it may have been. Yeah, I think I said the Containment Priest can control token creatures, but it can't. But I do make a flub every day, so let me know where I flubbed up this time. And also tell me all your takes, all the interactions I missed, all that. Because it's entirely possible there's a ridiculous interaction that I've completely missed in here, and it's going to change standard forever. But I don't think so. Let me know if I did, though. Aside from that, check out the Patreon. Deck Tech season's almost upon us. And if you donate $1 to the Patreon every month, which is, I don't think, too much. I mean, it's not too much. It's a good deal to me. You get to vote on what content we do on the channel, what deck techs we do first this season, and you get a notification when we start streaming on Twitch. By the way, you want to see me stream on Twitch? Follow me at twitch.tv/SBMTGDev. I'll leave links to all this down there in the description. It's just something I got to go over. Also, make sure you like the video. You can like the video if you want to. Sub to the channel. There's a lot more spoilers to come, and again, deck techs and all that. So top 10 list, blah, blah, blah. You want to be subbed, do it. I want 120,000 subs. Please help me get there. Sub to the channel. But anyway, I'm done for this one. It is incredibly hot in this room, so I'm going to stop. And I guess I will talk to you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.